Why was the Premier bragging to Breitbart about her specific conversations to U.S. officials inviting foreign interference into Canada's election?
Hear, hear.
Before I got my economics degree, I got an English degree. And in my English degree, I learned the term antonym. And an antonym is the exact opposite of what the people across the aisle are claiming.
In fact, his language sounds a bit familiar. As Danielle Smith has said, Pierre Poilievre is in sync with Donald Trump.
People are free to make their own comments. I speak for myself, and let's talk about my agenda. My agenda is to put Canada first for a change.
Canadian Premier Danielle Smith was cornered over her remarks to U.S. media outlet Breitbart News in Alberta Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier has invited foreign influence in our Canadian elections. On March 8th, she went on the extreme far-right Breitbart program and said, quote, "I would hope that we can put things on pause is what I've told administration officials," end quote. Why was the Premier bragging to Breitbart about her specific conversations to U.S. officials inviting foreign interference into Canada's election?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I got my economics degree, I got an English degree. And in my English degree, I learned the term antonym. And an antonym is the exact opposite of what the people across the aisle are claiming. Interference is one thing. Asking the U.S. to refrain from is actually the opposite. I do not want to see anyone interfere in our elections. I want to see the election take place on Canadian issues so that we can put on the table what our issues are in Alberta and hear how each of the parties respond to it.
The issue drew steam from Prime Minister Mark Carney and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh during election campaigns.
In fact, his language sounds a bit familiar. As Danielle Smith has said, Pierre Poilievre is in sync with Donald Trump. The President is waiting for the outcome of the election and see who has a strong mandate from Canadians, or who has a mandate from Canadians. Is it someone who is, to quote Danielle Smith, who's in sync with him? Or is it someone who's going to stand up for Canadians? I'm going to stand up for Canadians. I hope Canadians will back me, and then we'll have a discussion.
I think it is shameful. If you break down what Danielle Smith is proposing, she's talking about taking steps to harm the Liberals and to prevent tariffs in a political manner to create a political outcome. She should be talking about stopping tariffs to protect Canadians, to just stop them entirely. She shouldn't be saying to do it in a way that benefits one party or another. If you're loyal to this country, if you care about Canadians, you would say, stop the tariffs. Don't hurt Canadian workers. Don't hurt Canadian families. Don't hurt Quebecers.
The Chief Election Commissioner of Canada, however, refuted claims of Smith invoking foreign interference with her remarks.
Elections interference is something that is not a term that's used in the Elections Act, but there's a number of provisions in the Act that may be relevant to foreign interference. So, for example, there is a provision on undue influence by foreign entities. There are rules on spending and third-party activities. The facts that you refer to do not trigger any of these.
Smith's March 8th interview said the threat of unjust and unfair tariffs had boosted Liberal support. She also supported Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre during the interview. Poilievre reacted to the comments during an election rally.
People are free to make their own comments. I speak for myself, and let's talk about my agenda. My agenda is to put Canada first for a change.
Smith had earlier gone to the U.S. before President Donald Trump's swearing in to meet him at Mar-a-Lago, drawing criticism from federal and provincial leaders.
Honourable members, the time is now 1:50, and that makes it oral question period. And the Leader of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition has question number 1.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier has invited foreign influence in our Canadian elections. On March 8th, she went on the extreme far-right Breitbart program and said, quote, "I would hope that we can put things on pause is what I've told administration officials," end quote. Why was the Premier bragging to Breitbart about her specific conversations to U.S. officials inviting foreign interference into Canada's election?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I got my economics degree, I got an English degree. And in my English degree, I learned the term antonym. And an antonym is the exact opposite of what the people across the aisle are claiming. Interference is one thing. Asking the U.S. to refrain from is actually the opposite. I do not want to see anyone interfere in our elections. I want to see the election take place on Canadian issues so that we can put on the table what our issues are in Alberta and hear how each of the parties respond to it.
Order, the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier has been cosplaying as the worst diplomat ever and has made things so much worse for both the federal Conservatives and for the nation. The Premier's spokesperson called the revelations of what the Premier said, quote, offensive and false. But they are her words, caught on tape, calling for foreign interference into our elections. Noted columnist Don Braid says, quote, her advocacy has shaded into political meddling, end quote. Why would the Premier and her staff call the remarks offensive and false when they are exactly what she said to an American audience?
That's right.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, for the last many months, I and my fellow premiers have been working relentlessly to convince U.S. officials at all levels how damaging the tariffs will be to both Canadians and to Americans. I was actually asked the question, do you know if any of the members opposite have made any calls to anyone down south to try to do the same thing? And I had to say, no, I don't, Mr. Speaker, because I don't think they have. And that is the difference, Mr. Speaker. I will do whatever it takes to make sure that Canadian businesses do not have tariffs on their products, and I'm going to continue that advocacy.
Honourable Premier, or Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I am proud to share that no member of the official opposition has called for foreign interference into the Canadian election. What the Premier has done is against everything Canadians stand for. We do not want undue influence from foreign entities. We cannot have Donald Trump interfering in Canada's elections. Exactly which U.S. administration officials did the Premier counsel to interfere in Canada's federal election?
A point of order is noted by the Government House Leader at 1:54. The Premier has the call.
Mr. Speaker, I've been giving interviews, I've been giving speeches, and I have been saying the same thing all along, that we need to have a renegotiated Canada-U.S. free trade agreement. That requires someone with a 4-year mandate. The members opposite might want to go back and look what I said in December. Let's have an immediate election so we have someone with a 4-year mandate who can negotiate with the U.S. President.
Order. One thing is certain, is that I had no problem hearing the question. I would expect to be able to hear the answer. The Premier.
And now that we are in the middle of an election, I would hope that our American counterparts would refrain from taking any actions on tariffs until that election is over.
The order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition for question number 2.
Mr. Speaker, forget December. We care a lot about what she said on March 8th, 2 weeks ago.
That's right.
The Premier's Breitbart interview has gone viral because the Premier says on tape that she is calling for foreign interference. Let me read her full quote for the Assembly. Quote, so I would hope that we can put things on pause is what I've told administration officials. Let's just put things on pause so we can get through an election. Let's have the best person at the table make the argument for how they would deal with them, and I think that's Pierre Poilievre, end quote. Why did the Premier invite foreign interference from the Americans to support Pierre Poilievre?
The Honourable Premier.
To know why the members opposite are trying to goad the administration into imposing tariffs on April the 2nd. Shouldn't they actually be aligned with us in saying the exact same thing? Now that we're in the middle of an election, we have 2 different leaders who are putting their ideas on the table, and we will see which one emerges as the leader at the end. I can tell you there's a reason why I have suggested that one leader would be better than the other. I know that the folks across the aisle are on Team Carney, but I'm on Team Alberta, and I know that Team Alberta means doing everything we possibly can to support our energy industry, which they don't, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the official opposition.
Mr. Speaker, rather than get tariffs cancelled altogether, the Premier said she asked U.S. officials to put a pause on them to help Pierre Poilievre's U.S. election efforts. That is calling for U.S. election interference.
Right.
She has no problems currying favors with extreme right-wing in the U.S., but last week she couldn't even be bothered to fly to Ottawa to meet with fellow premiers and Prime Minister. Now, why does this premier attack Canada, Canadian values like public health care, Canadian institutions like free and fair independent elections at every opportunity?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was on the call for the First Ministers, as were 3 other premiers, because you can't expect, I think it's unreasonable to expect that we would cancel our entire agenda for the day, especially when we had such a great announcement on Friday. We have an $800 million partnership with Siemens to use artificial intelligence to improve the diagnosis of cancer. One of the things that they're hoping for is to be able to reduce the amount of time it takes to go from diagnosis to treatment from 2 weeks to 2 hours, Mr. Speaker. This is one of those private sector partnerships that works, and I'm very excited about it, and I'm just glad to be there.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
No end of excuses not to stand up for Canada.
That's right. Yeah.
The Premier went on right-wing Breitbart radio to say, quote, the perspective that Pierre would bring would be very much in sync with, I think, the new direction in America, end quote. Not only is the Premier willing to use Alberta taxpayer resources to campaign for her chosen candidate, she's willing to admit she thinks Pierre Poilievre is just like Trump.
Right.
Trump, who unprovoked dropped devastating tariffs on us that will end good jobs, kill industries, and hurt our country. Why would the Premier welcome U.S. election interference to mold Canada in Trump's image?
Here, here.
Order. A point of order is noted at 1:58 by the Government House Leader. The Premier has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are 9 things I put on the table last week: guaranteeing Alberta full access to oil and gas corridors northeast and west, repealing the No New Pipelines Act, lifting the taker ban off the BC coast, eliminating the oil and gas emissions cap, scrapping the clean electricity regs, ending the prohibition on single-use plastics, abandoning the net zero car mandate, returning oversight of industrial carbon pricing to the provinces, halting federal censorship of energy companies. The Leader of the Official Opposition said, sounds pretty reasonable. Team Carney, which they're on, said one thing in Alberta, saying he didn't support hard caps, and then he said he was going to impose them nonetheless, Mr. Speaker. That's the difference I'm talking about.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition for question number 3.
It is so clear the Premier is on Team Trump, not Team Canada.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier has been using all her communication channels to campaign for the Conservative Party of Canada, from the Breitbart interview to her Twitter account. Not a day goes by when she isn't attacking some political leaders to the benefit of Pierre Poilievre. And she's called for U.S. election interference into our elections to get it.
Wow.
How many taxpayer resources has she spent on these partisan attacks, and has she reported these partisan hits as Election Canada in-kind donations?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm on Team Alberta, always have been. The folks across the aisle, they were on Team Trudeau and now they're on Team Carney. Why aren't they standing up and saying, as he threatens another emissions cap, why aren't they standing up?
Order.
Right. The Premier has the call.
Why aren't they standing up? Another Conference Board of Canada report today talked about the devastation that would be caused by an emissions cap, the downturn in investment, the downturn in the economy, the loss of jobs, the loss of income. If they want to demonstrate they're on Team Alberta, they're welcome to it. Stand up and support us in calling for an end to these damaging Liberal policies.
Order. The Leader of the Opposition.
Clear the Premier is on Team Trump, not Team Alberta.
That's right.
Unlike her Conservative counterpart, Doug Ford, who is staying out of the federal election, this Premier cannot help herself. Every time this Premier weighs in, it's because she wants Trump's guy, her guy, Pierre Poilievre, to win. Yeah. The Premier should admit these kinds of remarks, especially to international audiences, look to Albertans and Canadians as the equivalent of improper contributions to federal politics. Does the Premier understand telling other foreign entities to meddle in Canada's federal election is wrong?
Hear, hear.
Will she take accountability, apologize, and cease this reckless behaviour?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I would like our election to play out, and I think we're seeing already early on exactly who is going to be best for Alberta. I'm not sure why the members opposite don't see this, but let me just give the details, Mr. Speaker. At emissions cap, which Carney has already promised that he's going to implement, would cause an 11% decline in GDP. We would lose 4.1% employment. We would reduce government revenues 9.3%, lower disposable income for each family by $3,300. This is not a hard choice, Mr. Speaker. Either you're standing with Alberta or you're not standing with Alberta. Which is it?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Team Trump talking right here.
That's right.
This is now the second major scandal this Premier is embroiled in this spring. No Albertan wants to see this kind of unethical, untrustworthy behaviour. No one besides Sam Raich, who wanted corrupt care. But when the tape is rolling, the Premier shares exactly what she believes and wants. Why won't the Premier denounce foreign interference in Canada's elections, stop using taxpayer dollars in the federal campaign, and call a public inquiry into corrupt care?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know how I could be more clear in saying, now that an election has been called, I would reiterate my hope that the United States would refrain from, meaning do not interfere, by imposing tariffs on their closest ally and largest trading partner during the middle of an election. Mr. Speaker, we have 35 days. We're going to see the ideas of each of the leaders on the table. I think we on this side have made it very clear the things that we expect from federal leaders to make sure that our economy can thrive. All I've heard from the members opposite is that they're supporting the approach that has been taken by the Liberal NDP coalition, and they're going to continue to do that.